Pleasure to also be joined by Howard Glazer, State Director of Operations. Mr. Matterson is going to talk to us about a presentation that he's going to be doing at the Thruway Authority Board later today on issues that are pressing. We'll let him make the presentation now, and then we'll have a discussion about it, and then any questions, comments from the press. Mr. Matterson.
All right. Thank you very much, Governor. Good morning, everyone. Governor, thank you for inviting me here this morning to tell you some good news about the Thruway Authority and what's happening later today. It's a very special day for the Thruway Authority. In fact, it's a historic day. We're going to be taking another step forward today in charting our path to manage and operate the authority's finances differently, to manage the organization in a fresh way with new approaches, and to get our fiscal house in order. Later today, the Thruway Board of Directors will act on a 2013 budget that demonstrates substantial financial savings and presents a new way of doing business. When approved, our 2013 budget will put the authority on solid financial footing, and it will avert the need for a toll increase. As we realize budget savings and manage the authority better and differently, we're also setting the stage to build big things again. This afternoon, the board will also consider awarding a contract for the design and construction of a new New York bridge to replace the Tappan Zee. This will be among the largest single contracts ever awarded in New York history. I'll speak more about that in a moment, but first I'd like to begin by discussing how our new management approach is helping to stabilize the authority's financial footing and prepare us to build one of the biggest infrastructure projects in North America. Well, it starts with new measures that we're putting in place to reform Thruway finances. Earlier this year, Governor Cuomo requested that the authority conduct an independent internal audit of the authority's financial condition, how we manage, how we operate, all of our practices. Navigant consultants found that the Thruway, for decades, had pursued financial practices that were characterized as risky, reckless, and that lacked transparency. Without action, the Thruway Authority's high A credit rating, which we maintain today, surely would have been in jeopardy and even downgraded, leading to higher borrowing costs and higher tolls for our customers. So the governor asked that the Thruway Authority consider all possible fiscal reforms. We reopened our books, we reviewed the Navigant report in detail, we found additional savings and reforms and opportunities to improve the way that we conduct business at the authority. And after working with the governor and the Division of Budget and others in the administration, we found additional cost-saving measures and permanent reforms. And today I will present the Board of Directors with a new cost-saving plan that does not include a toll hike. Some of the new measures for fiscal reform are included in the budget today, and the Thruway Authority has already begun to implement these plans even this year to eliminate those poor fiscal practices that were characterized in the audit and to make transformative operational changes that generate long-term savings. The plan that's already underway is cutting $25 million in operating costs in 2012 alone, and we have targeted more than $130 million in savings and fiscal reforms over the next 3 years. We've also are in the process of eliminating the $900 million in risky short-term debt that was outlined in the Navigant report. From 2011 through 2013, 361 positions are being eliminated, shrinking the authority's workforce by fully 6%. Significant reductions in other things like discretionary expenses, travel, overtime, manager salaries are frozen, and the authority will work with the governor and will continue to work with the SAGE Commission on further savings and service sharing opportunities with some of our sister agencies and authorities. The plan that our board will consider later this afternoon also includes implementing operational reforms, streamlining measures, better asset management practices to pick projects differently and to deliver them more efficiently. And again, service sharing opportunities will be identified. The authority will be ending our annual reimbursement for New York State police expenses. Now, this is a requirement that's been in place since the authority first opened in 1954. The Thruway and the state will also work together to find new opportunities for shared services. And in our proposed 2013 budget, the operating portion is 21% below our 2012 operating budget. There's some other specific efforts that continue in this cost-cutting and reform plan. We're reducing vehicle and equipment costs and the number of purchases. We're reducing our fleet size. We're bringing authority employee benefits into line with those benefits that New York State employees enjoy. We're going to consolidate management functions within the authority. We're handling our energy contracts and how we purchase and manage power differently across our facilities in New York State. We're improving the way that we dispose of real property and exploring joint management opportunities for the Canal Corporation. Of all these transformative actions, we will be cutting costs by hundreds of millions of dollars and preventing the proposed 45% commercial toll hike that was proposed earlier this year. At the same time, we're setting the stage to enable the authority to build bigger and better than ever before. And so today, the authority will take another historic action, and that is to consider awarding a contract on a new New York bridge to replace the Tappan Zee. As you've seen recently, as we presented publicly, there are 3 bridge options that the Board of Directors will be considering this afternoon. Proposal 1, which you see pictured here, came in at a price of $3.142 billion, Proposal 2 at $3.99 billion, and Proposal number 3 at a cost of $4.059. Now again, it's important to point out that those are the bid prices, and there will be other costs associated with the project management and contingencies and other development costs. If you compare the 3 proposals together, I think you can see pretty clearly why Proposal 1 was the unanimous recommendation of the selection committee. Again, the proposal price is the lowest, but the construction time is the shortest. In terms of environmental impacts, the dredging amount is considerably lower than the other proposals, and as was required, this project will be ready for mass transit at such time in the future as a method is identified. So this morning and later this afternoon, I'm announcing that I concur with the selection committee's recommendation, and I will be formally recommending to our board of directors that they award the contract to proposer number 1. Just to hit some points from the construction process and the benefits of this project, it's going to create tens of thousands of jobs, not just in the lower Hudson Valley, but from all across New York State and throughout the Northeast region. There's very strong Buy America contract provisions, in part because of our strong partnership with the Federal Highway Administration and US DOT. With Governor Cuomo's leadership, last December, about this time, new design-build law was put in place in New York that enabled us to procure this contract through design-build and shift a lot of risk to the contractor and away from the taxpayer and the toll payer. This is going to enable us to push some of the costs for cost overruns and delays that would typically be borne by the state owner back to the private company. There was also a historic project labor agreement that was negotiated on this project. It's estimated to save more than $450 million off the price of the project, and it's been replicated already in other projects across the country as a model for how these agreements can be pulled together. Throughout the course of the project and also going forward, we have worked very hard to minimize the community impacts of this project. So even as we go forward in the construction phase, there will be real-time video available 24 hours a day through the project website. You'll be able to monitor noise and air quality during the construction process, minimize the pile driving on the project based in part on some of the smart early investments that the state made to understand better what kind of techniques we could use in the river to minimize the environmental impacts, but also the noise and other impacts on the community. We're implementing state-of-the-art controls on dust prevention, emission controls from the equipment that the construction teams will be using. And we're very lucky to have the river itself as the main artery to deliver goods and equipment and even people to the construction site so that we can minimize impact on the river towns. As we've talked about a lot, but I'll remind you with the highlights here this morning, this was a dysfunctional process over the last 10 or 11 years. The first time the state started to talk about replacing the Tappan Zee Bridge was back in 1999. Since then, there have been at least $88 million spent on reviewing a number of proposals, 150 different design alternatives and concepts, hundreds of public meetings, and yet with all that activity, we never got off the starting line and we never started to fully develop the project or even pinpoint an objective for the project. Last October, Governor Cuomo ended that dysfunction by articulating his vision for how the project should unfold. And there were some very simple but very important elements of that vision. One was to ensure that the project and the bridge would last at least 100 years without major reconstruction or major investment. Second, that it would be transit ready. Third, that we would use design build, this new law that was passed, in order to facilitate a faster project and shift some of that risk away from us as the owner, and also to incorporate strong environmental considerations as we develop the project. I'll give you some of the date highlights here. In October, the vision was articulated. In December of last year, the design build law was signed by the governor. The environmental impact statement draft was published in January of this year. The project labor agreement that I mentioned was negotiated and approved in June of this year. The bridge proposals were submitted at the end of July. And the final environmental impact statement was approved in September. And that's very important if you look at the DEIS in January of 2012 and the FEIS in September. That phase of a project typically takes, on average in the United States, 78 months. So between 6 and 7 years, we did it in about 7 to 8 months. And finally, the selection committee created its report to recommend to the board in September. Public preview of the 3 bridge designs and prices have occurred earlier this month. And today, the Thruway board will act to award the contract. That's my story, Governor. I hope
You're sticking with it.
I'm sticking with it. I hope it's a good one. We're excited about it. It's a new day at the Thruway Authority, and it's really exciting to be acting on the bridge today, Governor.
Well, stick with that story because it's a winner. And it's good news for the people of New York. First, that you could avert the toll increase is very exciting and very big news. My position was that the toll increase would be a last resort. I thought it would be counterproductive. I understand the financial necessities, but I thought it would be counterproductive from an economic development point of view, especially in upstate New York. We've worked very hard to say to business that it's a new day in New York and that we got it and we're working on reducing costs, and New York is not going to be the high tax state, the high cost state, the high regulation state. And I think a toll increase, although bridges, roads all across the country are increasing tolls, I thought it would send the wrong signal, especially at this time when we're working so hard to send a different signal. Now, it's always easy to say, we'll find efficiencies, find economy of scale. It's very, very hard to do. And these were very aggressive cost-saving measures because it was a lot of money that we were trying to make up. But I applaud you and I applaud your team for working through. We asked for creativity and we found creativity. I hope the board accepts your plan. But again, especially on behalf of upstate New York, that has been struggling with an economy that has been less than robust for a long period of time. We spent the morning preparing for the state of the state. We're working on economic development initiatives that will have a significant impact on upstate New York because we understand the need in upstate New York economically. So this is going to make a major difference. Congratulations on that. On the bridge, you'll pick the design, and I'll leave that to the board. On the aesthetics, you really don't want to hear about my opinion on aesthetics. I'm sure that would open a whole chapter of ridicule. But the fact that you moved as quickly as you did is really extraordinary. And I want to congratulate the whole team on that. And they had a lot of help, but Karen Ray and Brian Coneybear did a great job. Secretary to the Governor Larry Schwartz was dispatched on top of all his other duties to go down and work with the local communities to make sure they understood what we were doing. Howard Glazer, Director of State Operations, worked on it night and day. But it's amazing when you think about it, and I think it's worth focusing on. You know, we talked about this bridge in the state of the state just about 1 year ago. And that was after this bridge had been talked about since 1999. I mean, $88 million, what was 430 meetings. And now in just about 1 year, the bridge went from articulating a vision to getting close to putting a shovel in the ground. And this is a bridge. This is, you know, it can take a year to plan an extension on your home, right? This is a $3-4 billion bridge with all the environmental impact and all the community sensitivities after this protracted period of debate. To say, and if we had wagered last year that we would be at this point, I think everyone in the room, probably me included, would have taken the wager. That it's not going to happen this fast. You can lay it out, you can plan, but government surely can't move that quickly. And it did. And I think that's something to remember, and I think it's a lesson for all of us. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that government projects take a long time and get strangled in red tape. It really doesn't have to be. And this is a project that shows it doesn't have to be. And sometimes you start to accept the delay in the normal process, and you say, well, that's just the way it is, you know, and that's the way it will always be. It doesn't have to be. And the dream of a government that is efficient and effective, that represents the people and that works and that is competent and that performs, that dream can be a reality. And you're showing that today on a very big scope. So we applaud you for it. Questions, comments?
Mr. Madison, on the fiscal plan for the Thruway Authority, has the outline of that plan been run by credit rating agencies, creditors, folks whose opinions matter on the Thruway's bond rating?
It has in a very general sense. There have been discussions with the credit rating agencies who received the information favorably. Again, the general parameters of what we're doing internally to effectuate cost savings. This is part of an overarching plan that we've been working on since January of last year, finding efficiencies within the authority, but we redoubled those efforts and we found some new partnering opportunities with the state to change our cost profile and to avert the toll increase. We expect to go back and meet with the rating agency sometime in January, and we will be able to more fully explain all the details of the plan.
Hey, Tom, I got a little confused because some of the savings were going back to 2011, some were 3-year projections. Your toll rate increase was for $90 million. Do you have a specific breakdown on how you make up for that loss in projected income?
Well, again, you know, this is the $85 million that the proposed commercial toll increase was expected to yield was only one piece of an overall financial plan and a financial problem that we found at the Thruway Authority and that the Navigant report pointed out that needed to be addressed. Part of it was getting rid of the short-term risky bond anticipation notes. It was looking internally to find a lot of operating savings that were, you know, those points that were articulated this morning. And it was partnering, the new component is partnering with the state on getting relief from our state police reimbursement. That adds up to around $60 million per year. and we're identifying about $24 million in additional operating savings that we can work in concert with the governor, with the state Division of Budget, to look for cost-sharing opportunities with other state agencies like DOT and other transportation entities.
How much have you been paying the state police? And so I would assume that if you're not going to reimburse them, that cost is going to now fall on the state police.
Well, the cost falls on the state of New York. The Troop T that has patrolled the Thruway since 1954 has been funded by the Thruway since 1954. Now, like all the rest of the state police troops, the funding will come from the state rather than the Thruway Authority.
How much have they paid?
It averages right now around $60 million annually.
What about the future of the canals? Is that still going to be part of the Thruway Authority? Do you have plans to privatize that, put it into another agency?
You know, the Canal Corporation, it's a requirement in the state constitution that it remain and be maintained in a navigable fashion. 20-some years ago, that responsibility was brought to the Thruway Authority, and I think that the authority and the Canal Corporation do an excellent job of living up to that constitutional requirement. There's no discussion at this point about physically changing the responsibility of who manages and operates the canal. But certainly some of those costs that are being offset by the state will help us because the Canal Corporation costs a significant amount, and the canal costs a significant amount to operate annually. We will continue, again, in the theme of shared services, to work to identify different ways of operating the canal, looking at other state agencies to maybe share some of the responsibilities, which will have a positive net financial effect on the authority. There's already a construct in place called the Canal Recreation Way Commission, which a number of state agencies participate on in an ex officio way. So you've got DOT, the Parks Department, DEC, that all could potentially play some role down the road, but we're going to talk about those things.
Okay.
Since your initial proposal, there's been plenty of public hearings about it, and then scheduled meetings. Was there ever a point where you were supposed to vote on this toll hike, and how much of a factor does the public, outcry for not wanting a toll hike play in your decision to restructure?
Well, that's the whole purpose of having public hearings when you propose these toll adjustments. Of course, it had an impact on our deliberations. The board and the individual members expressed concern and wanted to talk about different ways to retool that proposal. The governor was very clear, as he mentioned this morning, that he wanted us to take a harder look and to drill down on our costs and our operating expenses and to try and find some solution that would avoid imposing this expense, particularly at this moment in time with our economic backdrop, on our commercial customers. So we did that.
Were you set to vote on it at all? Were you set to vote on it in previous meetings that were canceled?
Well, we didn't conduct a meeting where the toll adjustment was specifically on the agenda, no.
Thomas?
Do you think there's any lessons learned here for state agencies that maybe they should sort of do this due diligence work on mining down and saving costs before proposing tax hikes and toll hikes and things like that?
No, they do. You know, there's a difference between an authority and an agency, obviously. The agencies would be doing this in concert with OMB on a regular basis. Authorities are a little different. But make no mistake, what the Thruway Authority is doing here is extraordinary. This was a significant amount of money that had to be covered, and I think they were extraordinarily creative and entrepreneurial in their approach. Karen's question about the Canal Corporation, that is a significant financial drain on the Thruway. It's a great historic asset for the state, and we support it, but it's expensive to operate the canal. The state was also helpful in working cooperatively with the Thruway Authority. Some of the costs we think are legitimately state costs. You know, the state police, the cost of the state police on the Thruway other roadways don't pay for the state police that police those roadways. So that was a way that the state could help financially. But this was a lot of work, many, many hours over a long period of time to come to this point. And we do this routinely, Tom. I mean, this is what the whole 2 years have been about, right? How do we find a different way to do it? How do we find a way to do it for less money? It's easier said than done is all.
Mr. Madison, if I could, does your new plan, the savings, I assume it goes out for quite a while, like several years. Can you say now that there won't be any other total proposal increases for the next 3 years, the next 5 years, for not just for truckers, but for anyone else?
I can say that our objective will continue to be to identify any option that we can exercise internally and in a partnership capacity or a shared service arrangement. We need to do everything we can and explore every option before we even consider a toll increase.
So you can't say that there won't be a toll increase proposal in the next 3 years or 5 years?
I'm saying that as the governor, directed and as we listened, we will continue to explore different ways of operating our organization, being more efficient, partnering with other organizations, and trying to exhaust all other options.
Excuse me one second, Glenn. Mike, nobody can say that. They have responsibilities to bondholders. Who knows what the future economy is? Who knows if they get hit by a storm, if the roadway gets torn up, They can't say there will be no toll increases. I can't sit here and say there will not be a tax increase no matter what happens, right? Because they have financial responsibilities. Everything they're doing is so they don't have to do a toll increase, obviously. They just spent months and months. But nobody can say no matter what happens, there will not be a toll increase.
Well, it would seem if you've got a financial plan for the next 3 to 5 years.
By their financial plan, there will be no toll increase. But the director can't say to you, I guarantee whatever happens, there'll be no toll increase.
But you don't say it for 1 year, right? For this.
No, the financial plan goes out several years, and there is no toll increase for the next several years.
What are the several years, Governor? 3 or 7 or?
Roughly 3.
Are toll increases anticipated as part of a plan to finance a new bridge?
Well, let's get through the contract phase this afternoon, and as you know, the financial plan for the bridge isn't fully complete yet. We now have the proposal cost. We understand roughly what our project management cost responsibilities will be, but we still don't have the information about the federal TIFIA loan, and that's going to play a very big role in how we complete the financial plan for the project.
But Glenn, the tolls for the Tappan Zee will be a major funding stream for the Tappan Zee. What are the tolls? We can't tell you today. We have the project cost, but as the director said, a big variable is, do we get a federal loan called the TIFIA loan? And if we get that loan, how much is that loan for? We're also putting together an advisory commission that will work with us on ways of fashioning the toll and finding other financial mechanisms to finance the bridge. We want to get the toll as low as possible, and we're going to be working towards that. We have a number of years before we get there, obviously. We have to do a little thing like build the bridge in the meantime, but we want to get the toll as low as possible, but the tolls on the Tappan Zee will be one of the main funding sources for that bridge.
So is it fair to say then that there will be some increase of the current toll?
I wouldn't want to get into that, Eric, because then how much and what, and it really does depend. It really does depend.
There's talk about your restructuring to save money in the debt of the Thruway Authority. Is there a figure on what the debt is and how much this could pay down toward the debt as far as the savings?
The Thruway's total outstanding debt?
The authority's debt, the debt of the Interstate Thruway Authority.
Yeah. I'd have to get you those figures. It's north of $3 billion in outstanding debt.
This plan would help pay down some debt?
Well, we've already taken the short-term notes that were of considerable concern to the rating agencies and were impinging on our financial stability. We've already refinanced that debt at the end of this past summer. So that was part of the refinancing our outstanding debt. But, you know, we will continue to look at refunding opportunities as the economy changes, and we think that there'll be some, you know, opportunities to do that going forward. But this isn't really about our debt restructuring. It's about focusing on the way we operate and how we partner with the state.
You know, part of this is, you have to remember, we all had the good fortune to come into government in this administration a couple of years ago, and then you take things as you find them, right? And you do the best you can. One of the issues of the Thruway Authority, I believe, it was mismanaged for many years. And they built up a significant amount of debt that then had to be serviced. And that's one of the reasons that was driving the toll increases, not to pay for the operation. It's not that the operations got larger, the operations actually got smaller. It was to pay for the debt that had been built up over the years. And that's one of the main obstacles that they inherited at the Thruway Authority.
With the end of the state police reimbursement, does that mean there's no longer going to be a Troop T, so-called?
No, there'll be the same troop, it's just who pays the cost. You'll still get a ticket, Rick, if you exceed the speed limit. And we will still get the proceeds from that ticket.
Mr. Madison, if I could clarify, were you ruling out talking about new additional elements that might force a toll increase on the Thruway, were you ruling out an increase in the Thruway toll tax to pay for any part of the Tappan Zee? Or is that not ruled out?
What we said on the Tappan Zee, Mike, is that increases above the current amount will be dedicated to the bridge reconstruction, and that ultimately, whatever that toll is, once we know the TIFIA component, the toll will be consistent with other Hudson River crossings.
So we're talking about just increasing the bridge toll, right?
On the bridge.
On the bridge, correct. That's correct.
Not the increase.
Correct.
Governor, last week, in the wake of the shootings, you released a statement saying you would like to see some action taken on firearms and guns and things like that. What sort of specific legislation did you have in mind, and do you think this is primarily a responsibility of the state government or of the federal government to act?
You know, Nick, I've worked on this issue for many, many years. I worked on it when I was in Washington. First, the situation in Connecticut is just a human tragedy, a personal tragedy, and it's every parent's worst nightmare in some ways. And it's horrific. And I called Governor Malloy right away, Connecticut governor, and told him that he's in our thoughts and minds and in our prayers. So our heart goes out to the people who are living through this nightmare. In terms of what it means for society and what it means for policy considerations, I think there are multi-dimensions here. There's something about the violence that this society perpetrates. That's a big part of it. We have to look at our mental health system. And we've made revisions to our mental health system over the years. We have to ask ourselves, is it working for everyone, and is it protecting society at the same time? And I think that's a legitimate conversation. And then we have to look at how the proliferation of guns and firearms. I think that is fundamentally a federal matter because the guns easily transfer over borders. States can help, and each state should look at their laws. We're looking at our laws. But the most efficient, effective vehicle is a federal law, because you can change the laws in the state of New York. We have some of the toughest gun laws in the nation, as does the state of Connecticut. But you can buy a gun in another state and drive several miles, and that's that. So I think there's no doubt but that a federal reform would be the most effective vehicle here.
Governor, there are pieces of legislation, for example, microstamping. You mentioned working on your state of the state. I mean, given the events, does that make that something you might make more of a priority, perhaps even put in your budget?
We are going to have a number of proposals that we are going to make. And as I said, there are things, Zach, that the states can do. I think there's a role for the states, but I certainly think there's a role for the federal government, because in many ways, if the federal government passed the law of the land, then by definition, you wouldn't need these state-by-state laws And no state's law could actually have a detrimental effect on any other state's law, right? Right now, our laws are some of the toughest in the nation, but in some ways it's to no avail because people can buy a gun somewhere else and drive it in. So a federal law would make the most dramatic effect. Karen?
Are you going to revise your litmus test at all to put anti-gun measures, or are you saying that you think right now our tougher laws are sufficient?
You read carefully my piece, as carefully as I read your pieces. You would see there is a caveat at the end. It says, these are some of the issues, litmus test, 1, 2, 3, 4, however many there are. And then it says, I'm also going to put forth the state of the state agenda. And that will have additional measures in it. You know, I don't see this as a snapshot. This is a state that has an ongoing, evolving role and an evolving legislative agenda. And the quote-unquote litmus test had a number of issues, which is where we are today. And there's going to be a state of the state, which is going to have a whole additional list of items that I believe are going to be essential, which I'm going to be speaking to the legislature about by definition, because it's the state of the state, it's the presentation to the legislature. And then depending on what legislators do with those issues and how they vote and how they function and whether or not they function and whether or not they vote, that is something that I'm going to be very involved in.
So gun control measures will be in the state of the state, or?
You have to wait for the state of the state. Otherwise, if I tell you now, then you will have nothing, no anticipation all through the next few weeks.
The Assembly is calling for a tightening of the state's assault weapons ban. They're saying that the type of semi-automatic rifle used in Newtown is not covered under the current law. Do you agree with that, that our ban should be tightened to exclude guns like that?
Danny, there's no doubt that our assault weapon ban, our assault weapon law has significant flaws and significant loopholes. We basically grandfather in all magazines pre-94, which to me is just a glaring omission. Much of the law is on the cosmetics of the gun, the design of the gun, rather than the actual capacity of it. So there's no question but that the law needs to be improved in my mind.
Governor, do you feel that assault-style weapons like the AR-15 should simply be banned outright?
I think much more has to be done on assault weapons, quote unquote, starting with Danny's point, how do you define an assault weapon? And that's, I think, going to be the first step.
Even after something like what happened in Connecticut on Friday, do you think that there's enough political will on the federal level to get something like a new gun control measure done, or even more funding for mental health issues?
That's what we're going to find out, Nick. I would hope so. And that's what we'll find out in the state of New York. You know, political will, does it exist, is your question, suggesting that you will rise or fall by whether or not there is political will. I would suggest there's a second question, or can you develop the political will, right? We in this state have developed political will. We've taken issues, we've gone to the public, we've educated the public, we've given them information, and we've developed political will. So I don't come from the school of thought that you live or die by public will. I believe on some issues, to an extent, you can create public will. And I believe on this issue, you can educate people, and if they understood the facts, I think they would be supportive of reform in this measure. No one is talking about making guns illegal. No one is talking about legitimate hunters and sports people. We're talking about illegal guns. We're talking about abuse of guns. We're talking about guns that have no real hunting or sporting purpose. But it's an emotional topic, and it is a question of communication, and it is a question of degree. But I don't know if the will exists today. It might because of the recent situations. But do I believe you can talk to people about this and educate people? Yes, I do.
What would
would you like to see in the federal gun legislation? What steps would you like to see the federal government take?
Certainly, you have to go back to the assault weapon ban and make it a real assault weapon ban. But that would be the first step.
Governor, what about going back in with the families and educating the families so that they can teach the children not to be using these violent video games, so that the father's sitting there going, ta, 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 and the son is 6 years old and doing the same thing? Don't you think that this is where a lot of this begins?
No, Betty, I think there's something to that. I think there's a culture of violence, especially among young people, and the video games. Maybe it's always been that way. You know, it was always cops and robbers or playing war games. But I think it's a more intense culture of violence. Some of the games, some of the videos make it so graphic and they're so pervasive. I believe that's part of this. I believe the mental health system is part of it. I believe part of it is guns and the proliferation of guns and what guns we've allowed to enter our society.
Governor, on the Sandy aid package, you mentioned the need to reimburse municipalities, otherwise they'd be forced perhaps to raise taxes. Do you have a sense of how much that is overtime? What percentage?
We can get you those numbers, Zach. But I wouldn't call it overtime. That's a pejorative when you call it overtime. We had a tremendous cost of operations during the emergency period, where people worked literally night and day. It wasn't really a question of volition. It was we needed first responders out there. They had to work. We were literally had people saving people's lives. So it's the reimbursement cost for those services.
One more.
Governor, are you going to sign the Justice Center bill and the Jonathan Kerry extension legislation?
We will have an announcement on that shortly.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.